The biting Christmas wind of Wyoming howled a mournful tune across the dusty, frost-hardened street. Inside the tiny room behind the mercantile, Mai Ling tightened the last button on a grey wool dress she had painstakingly mended. The approaching holiday meant more work, but no more cheer. Her fingers, raw and chapped from the constant push and pull of the needle, ached with a cold that seemed to seep into her bones. This small, cluttered space was her entire world, and the needle was the only instrument she could command in a town where a Chinese woman was treated as less than a shadow. At 28, she was a widow, and the people of this town had already etched out the bleak blueprint of her life. In their narrow eyes, she was simply the Chinese widow, a fixture of quiet labor and sorrow, nothing more. The tinny bell above her shop door jangled, a harsh sound against the wind's cry, and Mai Ling's shoulders instinctively tensed. She knew that heavy, deliberate footstep. Mr. Bartholomew Thorne filled the doorway, a human storm cloud smelling of rich tobacco and unchecked power. He owned the mercantile, the bank, and what felt like half the county. More terrifyingly, he wanted her. "Good afternoon, Mrs. N," he said, his voice a low rumble as he stepped closer than any decent man should. Mai Ling kept her eyes fixed on the sleeve she was mending, the fabric a flimsy shield against his presence. "I am working, sir." "That is fine work," he said, but his gaze wasn't on the dress. It was on her, a predatory assessment that made her skin crawl. Such delicate hands should not struggle in a place like this. Her stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. "The dress is for Mrs. Albright. I must finish it today for her Christmas gathering." Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "She will wear it to church and pray for your soul." All in one breath he casually pushed aside a bolt of calico, leaning his bulk against her work table, invading her small space. "I have asked you twice now, Mai Ling. A woman alone is not safe. You need a husband. You need my protection." "I am managing," she said, her voice a fragile thread of steel. Inside, she was a whirlwind of fear. "Are you?" Thorne's tone turned colder, sharper. "I hear young Jin is doing good work at my warehouse. A quick boy. But winter is long, and Christmas cheer doesn't pay the bills. Jobs grow thin when the snow flies thick." Mai Ling's needle froze mid-stitch. She finally looked up, meeting his cold, possessive eyes. Jin was her 17-year-old brother, the only family she had left, the only warmth in her desolate life. Thorne's mouth twisted into a smirk. "You do your duty, Mai Ling, and I will do mine." "I will not be your wife," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. The smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a cruel, chilling hardness. He reached out, his thick fingers intending to tuck a stray curl of her silken black hair behind her ear. She jerked away as if struck. "Pennies from mending shirts won't save you," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "Your husband's debts are heavy. They belong to my bank. Your small house by the frozen creek belongs to my bank. Your brother's job is tied to my goodwill." He walked to the door and pulled it open, letting a blast of frigid, dusty air spill inside, a tangible manifestation of his threat. "I will expect you for dinner on Saturday. We will discuss the wedding arrangements." He left her shaking, staring at the empty doorway as the cold settled deep within her. That night, in the small, leaning house she shared with Jin, a place that felt more like a cage than a home, Mai Ling told him everything. The flickering lamplight cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil in her heart. Jin's face grew pale, a sickly white under his dark hair. "You told him no," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I told him no again today," she confirmed, her own voice trembling. "Today he spoke of your job. Our home." Jin swore under his breath, a sharp, angry sound that was lost in the wind rattling the window panes. "We can't stay, Mai Ling. We have to run." "He will find us," she said, the despair a physical weight on her chest. "He owns everything." They ate their meager stew in silence, the broth tasting of sorrow and fear. That night, Jin slept the fitful sleep of the worried, but Mai Ling stayed awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire. She could not marry Thorne. She could not sell herself, not even to save her brother. But if she refused, they would lose everything, cast out into the brutal Wyoming winter with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The next morning, driven by the need for thread, she went to the mercantile. She kept her head bowed, her shawl pulled tight, praying not to see him. But fate was cruel. As she passed the back office, she heard Thorne's voice, thick and self-assured, drifting through the closed door. "She is being difficult," he said to an unheard listener. "But if she will not come willingly, then the bank will foreclose on Monday. Jin will lose his job by noon. Hunger and cold will bring her to me. A stubborn woman is just a horse that needs breaking. She will learn who her master is." The spool of thread dropped from Mai Ling's numb fingers and rolled, unseen, across the dusty floorboards. Her property. His property. The words echoed in her mind, a death knell. She slipped out the side door, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps as she ran home, the icy air burning her lungs. There was only one thought in her mind, a frantic, desperate mantra: run. She worked with a feverish intensity, packing what little they had. Stale bread, a hunk of cheese, her precious sewing kit, a worn quilt, and her late husband's old, heavy revolver. She took the few dollars she had saved in a tin box, a pitifully small sum against the mountain of debt Thorne held over them. She saddled her mare, Petal, her movements clumsy in her haste. With trembling hands, she pinned a note for Jin to the door, the words blurred by her tears. "I will find work. Thorne cannot use me against you if I am gone. Go to the mission in Cheyenne. I will find you. I love you." And then she rode. She did not look back. 2 days later, she was fighting her way through a blizzard in the high mountains. The world was a blinding swirl of white, the snow deep and treacherous. Nearly blind from the relentless cold, she followed nothing but a fragile sliver of hope, praying the memory of a name was enough. Rowan Colt. The quiet, solitary rancher who had saved her once before, years ago, after a stagecoach accident. The man with storm-colored eyes. The man she had never, ever forgotten. The night she finally found his cabin, a faint speck of light in the overwhelming darkness, she collapsed in the snow just 20 yards from the door. She tried to crawl, her limbs refusing to obey. She whispered his name, a plea swallowed by the howling wind. "Please." The door creaked open. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped into the storm, silhouetted against the warm light, a rifle held loosely in his hand. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, a dark shape in the swirling snow. Then he moved forward, his steps sure and steady, grabbed the collar of her coat, and dragged her inside like a sack of grain. She gasped as the sudden warmth hit her frozen skin, a shock so intense it was painful. He kicked the revolver from her numb hand, the metal clattering on the wooden floor. He looked down at her, his cold, grey-blue eyes the same she remembered from 4 years ago, but harder now, colder. "Mai Ling," he said. It was not a question. He knelt beside her, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. "You're freezing to death." She tried to speak, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Thorne. Jin. Please." Rowan stood, tossing a heavy, coarse blanket over her, and turned his back to the fire. "I don't know who Thorne is," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And I don't want to know." Mai Ling shivered violently under the blanket, her body shaking with a life of its own, her fragile hope threatening to shatter. She had made it to him, but he was not the man she remembered. He was hardened, scarred, and colder than the unforgiving winter outside. She had run to the only man who had ever saved her life, but she did not know yet if he would save her this time. What if the only safe place left in the world was inside a cabin with a man who didn't want you there? Mai Ling woke slowly, every bone in her body aching from the cold she had barely survived. She lay on a narrow cot covered in thick, warm furs, the gentle heat of the fire a soothing balm on her skin. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw him. Rowan Colt sat at a small, rough-hewn table in the dim light, meticulously cleaning his rifle. His movements were steady, precise, and utterly detached. His face was rough with a dark beard, and a jagged white scar ran from his temple to his jaw, pulling at the corner of his eye. It changed him. It made him look older, haunted, carved from the same unforgiving stone as the mountain outside. "You're in my bed," he said without looking at her, his voice a low grumble. "I expect you'll be out of it by morning." Myling pushed herself up, her muscles trembling with weakness. "Thank you. You saved my life." "I dragged you out of the snow," he corrected, snapping a metal piece back into place with a sharp click. "The weather saved you, not me." Her heart sank. This was not the quiet, gentle protector she remembered. This man was shut tight behind walls built of loss and silence. She tried again, her voice pleading. "I needed help." "A man named Thorn." "I don't want to know." Rowan cut her off, standing and walking away from her, his tall frame blocking the firelight, plunging her into shadow. "I live up here because I don't want company or trouble." "You brought both." Her hands trembled in her lap. "I cannot go back." "You will," Rowan said, his back still to her. "When the storm breaks." 2 days, no more. She stared at his rigid back, a wave of desperation washing over her. "He will kill me if I go back." "That is not my concern." The words were like stones, cold and hard. But Myling was stronger than he expected. She forced her shaking legs to obey her, standing and walking to the far wall where a steady drip of water fell through a loose log. "Your roof is leaking," she stated, her voice surprisingly steady. "The chinking is failing." "I can fix it." He didn't turn. She pointed to his coat thrown over a wooden peg, its sleeve torn wide open. "Your coat needs stitching." "I can fix that, too." Rowan looked at her then, really looked at her. She was pale, her face bruised by the cold, barely able to stand, yet she was offering to work, to earn her keep. He shook his head, a gesture of weary resignation. "I don't need a seamstress." "And I cannot go back to Mr. Thorn," she said, her voice finally cracking. "He will find me. He will take me." The raw fear in her voice pierced through the thick armor he wore. He turned away quickly, hiding the sudden conflict on his face. The wind screamed outside, a primal cry of fury. Snow piled higher against the single window. The mountain had trapped them together, whether they wanted it or not. "Fine," Rowan said at last, the word torn from him. "You cook. You mend. You stay out of my way." And just like that, a fragile, unspoken bargain was struck. The storm did not break. 2 days passed, then another, then a week. Snow climbed up the cabin walls, turning their world into a silent, white prison. Rowan rigged a rope from the cabin to the barn so he wouldn't get lost walking the mere 20 yards between them. Inside, the air was thick with tension. He hunted during the brief lulls in the storm, returning with little more than frozen hands and the scent of pine and smoke clinging to him. She cooked what little they had, stretching their meager supplies with a skill born of long practice. She mended his torn coat, his socks, his shirts. Each neat, precise stitch was a silent plea, "Please let me stay." He spoke little. She spoke little. The silence pressed down on them, as heavy as the snow outside. One night, as the fire crackled and spat, casting flickering shadows on the rough log walls, Myling dared to speak into the quiet. "My husband," she said softly, her hands never ceasing their work on a torn sleeve, "he was not a kind man. He liked the saloon more than he liked his marriage. He left debts." Rowan didn't look up from sharpening his knife, but she knew he was listening. "Thorn bought those debts," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "He threatened my brother. Jin is just 17. He will lose his job. The bank will take our home." Rowan's jaw tightened. Towns are full of men like Thorn. Myling hugged herself, staring into the mesmerizing dance of the flames. "I had nowhere else to go. I remembered you." He glanced at her for a moment, just a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his storm-colored eyes, then looked away quickly. 2 days later, he came home injured. Blood soaked the sleeve of his coat, a dark stain against the worn fabric. He held his arm tight against his chest, his face pale beneath his beard. A wolf, he said tersely, his voice strained. Caught in one of my traps. It wasn't dead. Mei-ling jumped from her chair. Sit down. Let me see. He tried to wave her off, but a wave of pain forced him into the chair by the fire. She poured whiskey over the deep gash, and Rowan inhaled sharply, a hiss of breath through clenched teeth, but he did not make another sound. This will hurt, she warned, threading a needle with practiced hands. Just do it, he ground out. She stitched his flesh with careful, nimble fingers, even as her own hand shook from fear and the lingering cold. His breath hitched once, just once, but he stayed unnervingly still, his gaze fixed on her face, only inches from his. She smelled clean, like soap and wood smoke, and her touch was soft, too soft for this harsh, unforgiving world. When she finished, she brushed a stray lock of hair from her face with the back of her hand. Her fingers grazed his skin. The touch was innocent, accidental, but it was enough to break the dam inside him. Their eyes met. The storm outside faded away. The crackle of the fire disappeared. It was just her breath and his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Rowan leaned forward and kissed her. It was wild, desperate, the kiss of a starving man finding food. She responded with a raw need of her own, pulling him closer, her hand fisting in his shirt. His mouth traveled to her neck. She gasped, her pulse racing, and then he froze. He ripped himself away from her as if he had been burned, stumbling backward. His chest heaved. His hands trembled. No, he rasped, backing away until he hit the far wall. I can't. I won't. Rowan? You're scared. You're alone. And I? He broke off, shaking his head, his face a mask of self-loathing. I will not be like him. He grabbed his still-torn coat and walked straight out into the freezing night, the door slamming shut behind him with a final, echoing thud. Mei-ling sat there in the firelight, trembling. The warmth of the kiss still burned on her lips, but the brutal cold of his rejection crushed her. She curled up on the cot and cried softly, believing she had ruined everything. Rowan stayed in the barn all night, sitting in the cold, oppressive dark, drinking from an old bottle of whiskey, trying to drown the desire he feared made him a monster. He did not sleep. The next morning, he returned, smelling of whiskey and snow. He did not look at her. He did not speak. Days passed in a silence so heavy it felt like another storm. Supplies dwindled. Hunger grew. Fear grew. On the fourth day, Rowan's frustration finally exploded, the silent tension snapping like dry wood in a fire. This isn't enough food, he said harshly, gesturing to the meager rations on the shelf. You can't stay. When the storm breaks, you leave. I can't, Mei-ling whispered, her voice a fragile plea. I don't care. His eyes flashed with anger, but underneath it, she saw a flicker of something else, fear. Fear of losing control, fear of becoming like Thorn. What did you do to make him hunt you this far? What does he want so badly? Mei-ling felt her heart break all over again. She lifted her head, her gaze steady despite the tears welling in her eyes, and whispered the ugly truth. He wants me because of a contract, she said. A forged one. What contract? Rowan asked, his voice rough with suspicion. The one that says I am the payment, she whispered, her body shaking with the shame of it. Me. He claims I belong to him. Rowan went still. He stared at her, his confusion slowly turning into a horrified understanding. Then came the rage. Pure, burning rage. He slammed his fist into the log wall so hard that the tins on the shelf rattled and jumped. No, he said, breathing hard, his voice a low, dangerous growl. No man owns another. It was a vow, a promise, a fire lit in the desolate winter of her life. Mei-ling felt tears fall, but this time they were not from fear. Something inside her loosened, a knot of terror that had been choking her for months. 2 days later, as the storm finally began to calm, a single rider appeared in the canyon below. A trapper, face hidden by a thick scarf, tossed a sealed letter into the snow and rode away without a word. Rowan brought it inside. My Ling broke the seal with shaking hands. Thorn's handwriting was thick and cruel, just like the man himself. The storm has cleared. I am coming to collect what is mine. Expect me by the end of the week. My Ling's breath stopped. He knows where I am, she whispered, the words stolen by a fresh wave of panic. She began to pack her few things in a frenzy. I have to go, Rowan. Please, let me go. He'll kill you, Rowan said, grabbing her shoulders firmly, his voice low and steady, a rock in her sea of terror. I'm not sending you away. She stared at him, tears of fear and confusion falling freely. But he will. No, Rowan said, his voice absolute. This is where it ends. He looked toward the door, his jaw set with the unyielding steel of a man who had already lost too much. He is not taking you. The old fear, the old pain, the old loneliness fell away from him in that moment. What remained between them was something raw, powerful, and unbreakable. For the first time, My Ling believed she might actually survive this. Maybe not because she was strong, but because, for the first time in a very long time, she was no longer alone. The cabin was no longer just a shelter, it became a fortress. Rowan worked with a sharp, dangerous focus, reinforcing the heavy wooden door with metal bands pried from an old wagon wheel. He boarded up the single window until only a thin, horizontal gap remained, just wide enough for My Ling's rifle. My Ling worked beside him, her hand steady now, not trembling, not afraid. The shared purpose forged a new bond between them. They were partners, a team, ready for the fight neither had chosen but both refused to run from. Snow fell heavy outside, a thick white blanket muffling the world in a deceptive peace. The cabin glowed warm with firelight, a beacon of defiance against the encroaching darkness. But inside their hearts, something stronger, hotter than any fire, was burning. You stand at the front window, Rowan said, his voice calm and low as he checked his shotgun. I'll take the door. My Ling nodded, her grip firm on the cold stock of the rifle. I won't let anyone hurt us. Rowan paused. He looked at her, really looked at her. This was not the scared, half-frozen widow who had collapsed in the snow. This was a woman who had survived storms far worse than any winter could conjure. She had survived men like Thorn. Now she stood with a rifle in her hands, ready to defend her life and his. He felt something deep and aching rise in him, a feeling that was equal parts awe and love. But there was no time to speak it. That night, the sound they had been waiting for came. The soft crunch of slow, heavy footsteps in deep snow. The nicker of horses. And then a voice, booming through the white darkness, arrogant and certain. Colt! I know you're in there. Send out what belongs to me. Thorn. My Ling gripped the rifle, her breathing tight in her chest. Rowan's face turned to stone. She doesn't belong to you. Gideon shouted back, his voice echoing across the silent, snow-covered canyon. Thorn laughed, a low, ugly sound that curdled the blood. Everything in this valley belongs to me, Colt. And she is the last debt I intend to collect. Another man rode forward, holding a sputtering torch high. Burn the barn, Thorn ordered, his voice laced with cruel satisfaction. Smoke them out. Take what's mine. No. My Ling cried, rushing forward, but Rowan grabbed her arm, holding her back. Then everything happened at once. Rowan burst out the door, shotgun raised. He fired a warning shot into the air above the riders' heads. Snow exploded from a pine branch, showering the men below. Horses bucked and whinnied in panic. One man fell from his saddle, clutching his leg. Gunfire crackled back at the cabin, bullets punching angry holes into the log walls. Rowan dove behind the woodpile, returning fire. My Ling dropped to her knees at the window slit, lifting the heavy rifle. Her hands were shaking, but her resolve was iron. She spotted a man slipping to the side, away from the main group, leveling his pistol at Rowan's exposed back. Her breath froze in her throat. Breathe out. Squeeze. The words of a long-dead father, a soldier, came back to her. She fired. The man crumpled into the snow and lay still. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. She had never taken a life before, but she had just saved Rowan's. The barn caught fire. The flames rose fast, licking greedily at the dry hay. The horses trapped inside screamed, a terrible, high-pitched sound of terror. One managed to kick its stall open and blast it out into the snow, its maner and tail alight. Thorn, seeing the chaos, dismounted and ran, not toward Rowan, but straight for the cabin door. He kicked it open and grabbed Myling by the arm. "You will learn your place," he snarled, dragging her out into the fiery night, toward the burning barn. Smoke choked her lungs. The intense heat seared her skin. She struggled, kicking and clawing, crying out for Rowan. But Thorn's grip was like iron. Then a shape burst through the wall of fire. Rowan. He did not hesitate. He crashed into Thorn, ripping him away from Myling. The two men fell into a stack of hay bales. Thorn swung wildly. Rowan's fists hit harder, fueled by righteous fury. "You will not touch her!" Rowan roared, his voice filled with all the pain of his past, all the rage of seeing Myling hurt, all the fury he had held locked inside for years. Thorn staggered back, his face a bloody mask, reaching for a pitchfork leaning against a stall. Its sharp prongs gleamed menacingly in the firelight. He lunged. Rowan dodged just as the roof above them cracked with a loud, sickening groan. Smoke and sparks rained down. Thorn, blinded by the smoke and his own rage, stumbled, lost his footing on the slick ground, and fell backward onto a broken, sharpened beam. There was a moment of shocked silence, then a wet, gurgling gasp. Thorn was still. The fire roared around him, consuming him. "Rowan!" Myling screamed. The roof was coming down. Rowan grabbed her and ran, pulling her through the flames and collapsing debris. A burning rafter crashed down exactly where they had been standing as they stumbled out into the clean, cold snow. They fell side by side, gasping for air, the snowflakes melting on their scorched clothes. The fire raged, painting the night sky orange and red, but they had survived. For days afterward, the cabin was filled with the lingering smell of smoke and a profound silence. The world outside felt strange and too bright after the darkness of their ordeal. Rowan treated Myling's wounds with surprisingly gentle hands. She, in turn, treated his burns with soft cloth and soothing salves. They mended each other quietly, speaking volumes in the spaces between words. Then, one afternoon, riders appeared on the ridge. A posse from town. Myling's breath caught, the old fear returning, afraid they would drag Rowan away in chains. But Rowan stood tall, his hand finding hers. "I'll tell the truth," he told her, his voice steady. "It's all we have." In town, people stared and whispered. Myling was locked in a room at the back of the church. For her protection, Rowan was put behind bars, for his. The inquest was packed with the same townspeople who had once turned their backs on Myling. Mrs. Albright stood first, her voice shrill as she wagged her finger, calling Myling a fallen woman, a foreign temptress, a liar who had led a good man to his doom. Myling's vision wavered with humiliation. Then the judge called Rowan forward. He spoke clearly, his voice ringing with conviction. "She ran because he claimed she was his property," Rowan said, his low, firm voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "He tried to take her by force. He hit her. I saw the bruises." Gasps filled the room. "She fought for her life," he continued, his eyes finding Myling's across the crowded room. "And I stood with her. She is no criminal. She is the bravest woman I have ever known." Myling's eyes filled with tears, not of shame this time, but of overwhelming relief and a love so powerful it stole her breath. Then something unexpected happened. The town turned. Young Ben, the blacksmith's boy, stood up and told how Myling had mended his winter coat for free when his family had no money. The mercantile owner spoke next, his voice shaking as he admitted Thorn had been blackmailing him for years. Then a ranch hand, then a miner. One by one, people admitted how Thorn had threatened them, cheated them, scared them. Their collective fear finally broke. Their voices rose, a chorus of defiance against the shadow that had loomed over them for so long. Finally, Judge Morrison struck his gavel, the sound sharp and final.